Hoping to finally escape the relentless danger, a breathless figure desperately wonders if she has safely reached the end of her harrowing pursuit. The fragile silence of her supposed sanctuary is suddenly shattered as a sharp swooshing sound violently cuts through the heavy air. Trembling with mounting anxiety, she fervently prays that her carefully hidden identity remains completely undiscovered by those hunting her. Her blood instantly runs entirely cold when a chilling voice abruptly calls out her location from the encroaching, suffocating shadows. A chaotic and highly tense confrontation explodes in the dimly lit hallway as she furiously demands an explanation from the hostile figures blocking her path. The enraged Vice leader vehemently accuses her of destroying everything their team built, claiming her treasonous association with a specific man was an unforgivable betrayal. Looming over the terrified girl, a ruthless combatant brandishing a weapon coldly commands her to hurry up and accept her inevitable, crushing defeat. A wide, terrified eye fiercely reflects absolute panic as a desperate cry for their boss violently echoes through the brutal scene. Reality seems to abruptly warp and distort as an ornate chandelier crackles brightly within the shifting, eerie darkness. Blinking heavily against the blinding light, the protagonist suddenly awakens in a lavishly decorated room and groggily questions her bizarre surroundings. A heavy wave of terrifying disorientation crashes over her as she realizes her memories have been entirely and inexplicably wiped clean. A sudden jolt of searing pain forces a sharp gasp from her lips as she carefully touches the extensive bandages wrapping her delicate arm. Utterly bewildered by her fragile physical state, she stares down at her heavily bound limbs and questions the violent cause of her mysterious injuries. Catching an unexpected glimpse of herself in the nearby mirror, profound shock instantly freezes her entire body in place. Staring intently back at the striking features reflected in the glass, she frantically demands to know whose unfamiliar face she currently possesses. As she meticulously studies the reflection, a jarring spark of recognition hits her mind when she realizes she has definitively seen this elegant girl before. An explosive, mind-bending epiphany violently jolts her senses, causing her to cry out in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. The horrifying truth perfectly clicks into place as she identifies her new body as Dahlia Agnes, a prominent character from Kaori's absolute favorite Otome game. She vividly recalls that within the game's intricate lore, this specific noble girl was notoriously branded as the universally despised tragic villainess. Dahlia's profoundly sorrowful backstory begins with immense loss, as her biological mother tragically perished immediately following childbirth. Left entirely vulnerable, Dahlia's wicked stepmother and cruel half-sister, Nanazelia, forcefully plunged her into a living nightmare of starvation, humiliation, and brutal physical whippings. Tragically isolated within her own opulent estate, absolutely no one, not even her negligent father or the complicit household maids, ever attempted to save her from the horrific abuse. Connecting the agonizing dots, she realizes her current bandaged wounds are the direct result of a savage whipping she endured after her deceitful half-sister viciously framed her. Desperately starving for familial affection, the original Dahlia lost sight of all morality and warped into a bitter villainess determined to ruthlessly crush the game's beloved heroine. After suffering through endless cycles of brutal punishment while simply yearning to be loved by someone, the tormented villainess ultimately died a profoundly pathetic death. Grasping her trembling face, she finally comprehends the sheer terror that she has been directly reincarnated into Dahlia's doomed, agonizing existence. She reels in absolute disbelief at the staggering amount of lifelong bullying and tragedy the original girl endured before inevitably meeting her gruesome demise. Despite her lingering confusion regarding this mystical transmigration, a fierce and completely unbreakable resolve suddenly ignites within her newly acquired body. Clenching her delicate fists with burning determination, she aggressively vows to entirely shatter the game's pre-written narrative and forcefully carve out a genuinely happy ending for Dahlia. Sitting alone in her quiet room, her tactical mind immediately begins strategizing the perfect method to systematically dismantle her grim destiny and secure that elusive joy. She accurately identifies that Dahlia's ultimate path to destruction was initially triggered by her disastrous selection as the fiancé candidate for the first prince, Heterogrady. Relying on cold logic, she deduces that the absolute easiest method to ensure her survival is to completely evade the dangerous royal fiancé selection process altogether. Peering thoughtfully through the grand glass window, she deeply ponders what the profoundly broken Dahlia truly desired deep within her heavily scarred heart. A sudden, captivating sight occurring just outside the expansive window leaves her completely breathless and utterly transfixed in awe. Her bright eyes widen in absolute admiration as she intensely observes a formidable warrior masterfully wielding a heavy sword in the golden sunlight. The sheer elegance and brutal, fluid power of the ongoing combat perfectly mesmerize her newly reincarnated soul. Staring intently at the incredible martial display, a profound realization washes over her as she remembers her own lifelong, burning desire to possess true strength. The deeply resonant concept of raw personal power echoes within her mind, instantly sparking a revolutionary and life-altering epiphany. Vivid memories of her past life violently flood back, reminding her of the fierce, relentless effort she once poured into expanding her fierce girl gang simply to become undeniably strong. Brilliantly fusing her past identity's ambitions with Dahlia's tragic future, she decisively vows to manifest Kaori's dream of ultimate strength while simultaneously rewriting this cruel world's destiny. A sudden spark of hope ignites as she remembers that the prestigious royal knights accept absolutely anyone into their ranks regardless of social status. Steeling her resolve in the quiet room, she tightly clenches her fist and fully commits to her bold new plan. Gazing fiercely toward her future, she confidently declares her absolute intention to rise to the very top of this world as an elite knight. Her grand ambitions are quickly interrupted by a loud rumble from her stomach, reminding her that she desperately needs to heal and build her stamina first. Slumping defeatedly on her bed, the physically weakened girl stares blankly ahead while her body protests its fragile state. Clutching her painfully empty stomach in agony, she groans aloud about starving in her dismal quarters. Pushing her frail body through solitary strength training in her room, she grimaces at the pitifully small meal that serves as her only recovery fuel. Mulling over her isolation, she logically deduces that she cannot rely on any of the household maids since they are entirely loyal to her cruel stepmother. Sneaking carefully through the dark halls toward the kitchen, she suppresses her burning desire to beat up Dahlia's abusers because her current scrawny body is far too weak. Her stealthy mission violently halts when a sharp, authoritative voice suddenly demands to know what she is doing in the shadows. Whirling around in absolute panic, she locks eyes with an approaching figure stepping into the dim light. A stern maid aggressively confronts the startled girl, immediately recognizing her as the madam's despised target. The tense confrontation is unexpectedly interrupted when another presence approaches from behind, causing the aggressive maid to look back in sheer confusion. Missing her brief window to escape, the cornered Dahlia defensively clenches her fist and mentally prepares to punch her way out of the hallway. The heavy tension instantly evaporates when the dignified head butler steps into view, shocking the frightened girl. Maintaining a perfectly calm demeanor, the elderly head butler politely asks the flustered maid if everything is all right. Sweating profusely under the intense scrutiny, Dahlia braces for the absolute worst, entirely convinced she is completely screwed. Thoroughly intimidated by the butler's authority, the maid nervously stammers out a denial and quickly retreats from the corridor. Turning his gentle attention toward Dahlia, the tired butler explains that he was simply grabbing a late-night drink after finally finishing his heavy workload. He quietly sets his glowing lantern down on the wooden surface, fully illuminating the quiet, secluded space. Politely confirming that she is indeed Lady Dahlia, he kindly asks the bewildered girl to wait for just a brief moment. Returning quickly, the gentle older man warmly offers a wrapped parcel of fresh food to the deeply surprised girl. Bowing his head respectfully, he offers his deepest apologies that this humble meal is all he can currently provide to the late madam's beloved daughter. Realizing with profound shock that this loyal servant actually knew her birth mother, she sincerely thanks him for the precious sustenance. Safely locked back inside her room, she clutches the food with immense relief, overjoyed to finally discover at least one true ally within this horrible household. Staring thoughtfully out her large window, she quickly grounds herself with the harsh reality that not every day will go this smoothly. Contemplating her difficult path forward, she silently wonders how she can possibly secure proper training under these strict conditions. Her deep thoughts are suddenly broken by sheer confusion as she notices a startling change on her daily meal tray. A bright smile stretches across her face when she happily realizes that her food portions have significantly increased compared to before. Happily devouring the delicious, hearty meal, she gratefully assumes the kind head butler secretly arranged the extra provisions. With her dietary needs finally met, she realizes her next massive hurdle is obtaining a real sword and finding a way to properly train for the upcoming night trial. Her strategizing is suddenly cut short when Nanazelia's loud, excited voice echoes through the halls, celebrating an upcoming trip to the capital. Peeking cautiously around the grand staircase corner, Dahlia quietly spies on her elegantly dressed stepmother and half-sister. Listening to them arrogantly discuss their lavish travel plans, she grimaces with pure disgust at the sight of her terrible relatives. The cruel stepmother joyfully declares that the two of them will go on an exclusive shopping spree in the capital together. Retreating behind the wall, Dahlia's sharp mind quickly processes the incredible implication that only her two tormentors are leaving the estate. A massive, triumphant grin erupts on her face as she realizes their absence leaves her completely free to execute her secret plans. Cleverly disguised in rough boy's clothing, she eagerly navigates through the incredibly packed and bustling streets of the lively capital town. Arriving at her intended destination, she looks up with determination at the weathered wooden sign of a local weapon shop. Pushing the heavy door open to the sound of a ringing bell, she boldly announces her arrival to the unseen shopkeeper inside. Stepping confidently into the busy weaponry stall, the disguised young girl faces immediate scrutiny from a bewildered shopkeeper questioning her lack of parental supervision. Bursting with fierce determination, she loudly declares her absolute intent to purchase a sword and train rigorously to become a true knight. Realizing the startling volume of her passionate outburst, she quickly blushes and bashfully apologizes for shouting inside the quiet shop. Gesturing animatedly, she clearly outlines her need for a lightweight blade that still possesses enough deadly sharpness to effectively take down any opponent. Intrigued by her precise request, the knowledgeable shopkeeper swiftly retrieves a uniquely crafted sword and presents it for her critical inspection. Her bright eyes widen in absolute awe as she beholds the gleaming, beautifully forged weapon placed carefully before her. Praising the weapon's incredibly sharp edge and feather-light build, the friendly merchant generously offers her a special discount for possessing the perfect grip. Clutching her precious new blade tightly to her chest, she beams with pure joy and profusely thanks the kind merchant for his incredible deal. Smiling warmly at her departing figure, the encouraging shopkeeper cheerfully wishes her the absolute best of luck in her journey to become a real knight. Stepping back into the bustling streets with her primary mission gloriously accomplished, she eagerly decides to explore the colorful market stalls. Thrilled by the rare taste of absolute freedom, she fiercely vows to maximize every single second of her precious day out in the vibrant capital. Approaching a lively food vendor, she happily exchanges her coins for a sweet treat and flashes a bright smile of genuine gratitude. Staring in absolute wonder at the sugary snack resting in her hands, she excitedly marvels at the simple thrill of purchasing it entirely by herself. Taking a massive bite of the delicious dessert, a radiant blush of pure culinary bliss instantly explodes across her delighted face. Strolling further down the lively market street, she pauses to intensely admire a wonderfully cute floral hair accessory displayed on a wooden table. Staring intently at the delicate trinket, she vividly recalls that in her past life she would have completely refused to buy something so adorable in public. Fierce memories of her former life as a formidable girl gang leader flood her mind, highlighting how intensely she forced herself to embody a tough and unshakable image. Despite commanding absolute fear on the rough streets, the hardened Kaori secretly harbored a massive, burning passion for sweet treats, shoujo manga, and romantic otome games. Sweating nervously at the memory, she vividly remembers exhausting herself just to keep her deeply feminine, soft side completely hidden from her aggressive peers. Breaking her nostalgic reverie, a quiet realization hits her as she remembers the single, extraordinary person who actually managed to uncover her closely guarded secret. The intimidating image of Miyabi instantly surfaces in her mind, a terrifying biker gang leader who strangely resembled a model student but ruthlessly made grown men cry. Vividly recalling their fateful first encounter, she remembers finding his battered, bleeding body collapsed in a grim alleyway and intending to only stay until he temporarily healed. Shattering her initial expectations, the recovering Miyabi formed an intense attachment to her and stubbornly refused to leave her side long after his severe wounds closed. Staring silently with deeply observant eyes, the formidable biker eventually discovered her embarrassing girly secrets but loyally guarded them from the rest of the unforgiving world. A soft, genuinely nostalgic smile graces her lips as she warmly reflects on those bizarre yet highly cherished memories of her unlikely companion. Quickly brushing off the sentimentality, she firmly concludes that the notoriously cold-hearted Miyabi has probably completely forgotten her and barely reacted to her tragic death. Jolted violently back to the present reality, a shocking sense of déjà vu forcibly grips her senses as she abruptly halts her market stroll. Peering cautiously into a dark, secluded corridor between the bustling shops, She recognizes an eerie, undeniable similarity to the exact alley where she first discovered Miyabi. Scanning the treacherous shadows with sharpening focus, her breath instantly catches in her throat as a mysterious silhouette materializes against the damp cobblestones. Blinking repeatedly to clear her bewildered vision, she urgently questions her own sanity upon spotting a crumpled human figure bleeding out in the heavy gloom. Sprinting desperately into the oppressive darkness, she forcefully screams out to the unresponsive boy collapsed violently upon the filthy alley floor. Sliding to a frantic halt beside the gravely injured victim, pure panic violently twists her features as she desperately assesses his brutal, bloody wounds. Shaking his limp, heavily damaged shoulder with trembling hands, she receives absolutely zero response from the deeply unconscious youth. Screaming at him to cling to his fading life, she fiercely vows to find a doctor and aggressively commands the dying boy not to surrender to the darkness. Pivoting to a brightly lit clinic, a grave doctor solemnly informs her that a mere few minutes of delay would have guaranteed the battered boy's absolute demise. Collapsing heavily into a nearby chair, an overwhelming wave of sheer relief violently washes over her trembling body as she tearfully thanks the heavens for his survival. Intently observing the sleeping boy's exceptionally elegant garments, her sharp mind rapidly calculates what extremely powerful noble family this mysterious stranger might belong to. Crossing her arms with mounting anxiety, she fervently prays to any listening deities that she has not accidentally entangled herself in a violently dangerous aristocratic conspiracy. Turning back to his critical duties, the exhausted doctor sincerely apologizes and urgently requests her to monitor the resting noble while he tends to other suffering patients. Left entirely alone in the suffocating silence of the medical ward, she casts a highly conflicted, deeply curious gaze down upon the slumbering boy whose life she just saved. Staring closely at the slumbering boy, she quickly deduces that his striking good looks firmly prove he is no ordinary commoner. Narrowing her eyes at his battered but handsome features, a sudden wave of undeniable familiarity hits her as she struggles to place his face. Frantically analyzing his noble attire, soft expression, long tied-up hair, and piercing gold eyes, the fragmented pieces of his hidden identity rapidly align. A massive, violent jolt of recognition rocks her mind as she finally matches the wounded boy's distinct appearance to a deeply familiar memory. Gasping in absolute shock, she realizes the bleeding noble is actually Heterogrady wearing a very clever civilian disguise. She vividly remembers him as the wildly popular first prince of the Balan Empire and the absolute most beloved romance target from the Otome game. Recalling a specific in-game scenario, she remembers how Hetera would periodically don this exact disguise to sneak into the bustling capital for secret entertainment. Her racing thoughts are abruptly cut short as the disguised prince suddenly groans and weakly opens his bright eyes to question her presence. Glaring coldly at his determined savior, Hetera bitterly demands to know why she bothered rescuing him instead of simply letting him bleed to death. Completely blindsided by his incredibly dark and ungrateful response, she stares down at the wounded prince in utter, silent disbelief. Her initial shock rapidly morphs into boiling frustration as his sheer disregard for his own precious life deeply offends her fierce, fighting spirit. Outraged by his terribly cynical attitude, her fiery temper violently flares up as she absolutely refuses to accept his audacity. Leaning in furiously, she aggressively scolds the bruised prince and yells that countless people are fighting desperately just to survive and change their brutal destinies. Continuing her fierce, impassioned lecture, she sharply reprimands him for displaying such unbelievable rudeness toward the exact person who just dragged him back from the grave. A sudden wave of horrifying realization violently crashes over her as she abruptly covers her mouth to forcefully muffle her angry outburst. Panicking intensely, she frantically backpedals and blurts out a clumsy apology upon remembering she just furiously yelled at the most powerful royal in the entire empire. Sweating nervously while retreating a few cautious steps, her racing mind snaps back to another strangely familiar encounter from her distant, violent past. A vivid memory of the terrifying biker Miyabi completely washes over her, reminding her how he possessed the exact same cynical attitude when they first collided. She clearly remembers Miyabi's bleak confession about being utterly suffocated by his boring life and simply wanting to die to escape the dullness. Reflecting on her past wisdom, she recalls fiercely telling the broken biker that his absolute failure to die firmly proved he was destined to keep living. Fusing her past life's tough love with her current chaotic reality, she hardens her resolve to handle the suicidal prince with the exact same unyielding compassion. Echoing her past bravado, She confidently declares to the stunned prince that he should consider it his own terrible luck that she stumbled upon his dying body. Mentally comparing the two broken boys, she nostalgically remembers the incredibly unexpected reaction Miyabi had to her harsh but deeply caring words. The tough biker gang leader had stared at her in absolute astonishment, entirely captivated by her unbreakable and wildly defiant spirit. Much to her total amazement, Miyabi had simply agreed with her brutal logic before bursting into genuine, roaring laughter as if it were the funniest joke on earth. A soft, deeply fond expression graces her delicate features as the cherished memory of Miyabi's extremely rare laughter warms her reincarnated soul. Snapping her violently back to the grim present, the heavily bandaged Hetero weakly reaches a trembling hand out toward her retreating figure. Flustered by his sudden movement, she rapidly stammers out a hasty farewell and abruptly spins around to flee the terrifying clinic. Freezing dead in her tracks, pure shock completely paralyzes her body as the arrogant prince sincerely and quietly thanks her for saving his life. Gazing softly at her tense back, Hetera confesses that her fiery words miraculously reignited his entirely lost desire to continue living. Blinking rapidly in sheer bewilderment, she mentally questions if the notoriously complex romance target was always capable of such gentle, emotional vulnerability. Offering him a brief but genuinely warm smile, she happily states she is glad to hear his renewed resolve just as he attempts to thank her once more. Desperate to escape before accidentally exposing her true identity, she forcefully interrupts his gratitude and loudly announces her final departure while bolting for the heavy door. Sprinting swiftly down the busy stone street, she fiercely rationalizes her rapid escape by assuming a guy who can talk that much absolutely no longer needs a babysitter. Slowing her frantic pace, an anxious sweat breaks out on her forehead as she desperately prays the cunning prince failed to see through her flimsy boyish disguise. Back in the oppressively quiet clinic, the golden-eyed Hetera stares intensely at the empty doorway with a deeply unreadable, obsessive expression locked onto his handsome face. A mysterious, darkly possessive aura rapidly surrounds the recovering prince as he softly whispers that he has finally found his elusive, perfect target. The scene shifts abruptly away from the capital, instantly returning to the suffocatingly silent and deeply oppressive halls of the Grand Agnes estate. Slipping quietly back into the massive mansion, she gleefully notes that her cruel stepmother and sister are still completely absent, brilliantly granting her the perfect opportunity to safely train. However, her supposed absolute secrecy is violently shattered as two highly suspicious maids lurk in the dark hallway shadows, viciously whispering about her newly hidden activities. Startled whispers ripple through the estate as rumors spread that the first prince has mysteriously vanished. Overhearing the tense gossip, she realizes a full week has passed since her fateful encounter with Hetera. Mentally reviewing the complex royal lineage, she notes the primary crown prince candidates are Hetera and Sugri. Despite being the strongest candidate by birthright, Hetera tragically lost crucial political backing following his mother's death. Dark memories surface regarding the second prince who perished in a highly suspicious carriage accident fueled by sinister rumors. Meanwhile, the current empress and her corrupt noble allies aggressively consolidate their power to back the third prince. Complicating the violent succession war, the incredibly powerful house of Marquis Agnes was originally supposed to remain strictly neutral. Leaning cautiously into the shadows, the gossiping maids demand absolute secrecy before sharing their explosive hidden information. The hidden eavesdropper completely freezes upon hearing that her wicked stepmother might be directly involved in the prince's disappearance. Pure shock violently paralyzes her entire body as the terrifying implication of her family committing high treason fully sinks in. Solidifying the deadly rumor, the spying maids confirm they overheard the cruel lady discussing a sinister plot with a capital guest. Frantically analyzing this catastrophic intelligence, she quickly deduces that the House of Agnes has officially positioned itself as Hetera's enemy. Knowing her stepmother's absolute ruthlessness, she panics over the horrifying possibility that a main romance target might actually be murdered. Sprinting desperately away from the dangerous spies, she races through the quiet estate with her panicked mind spiraling into total chaos. Channeling her overwhelming anxiety into raw physical power, she viciously strikes a heavy wooden post during her secret training session. Swinging her blade with furious desperation, she bitterly curses that Hetera's premature death would permanently ruin her chance to level up. Her relentless martial assault abruptly halts when she sharply senses an unexpected presence lurking nearby in the training grounds. Glancing up from her wooden sword, She gasps in pure astonishment as the elusive Hetera suddenly materializes right before her eyes. Flustered by his sudden arrival, she nervously stammers out a clumsy greeting while he steps forward to gratefully thank her. Questioning his fragile physical state, she receives a calm reassurance that his brutal injuries are healing properly. Feigning casual relief, her sharp tactical mind races to figure out exactly why the missing prince absolutely refuses to return home. Staring intensely at her disguised form, Hetera narrows his piercing eyes and notes that her highly strenuous activities are unusual. Shattering her fragile boyish illusion, the highly perceptive prince calmly questions why a young girl is secretly practicing advanced swordsmanship. Absolute panic violently erupts within her chest as she realizes her carefully crafted civilian disguise was effortlessly seen through in seconds. Connecting the undeniable physical clues, Hetera correctly deduces her grand ambition to officially join the prestigious knight ranks. Defending her bold dream, she fiercely declares to the royal that raw combat skill should completely overwrite any foolish societal gender restrictions. Gripping her wooden sword tightly, she passionately vows to definitively prove a girl can become a truly formidable knight. Utterly captivated by her fierce determination, a look of profound astonishment completely softens the prince's usually heavily guarded expression. Smiling with intense nostalgia, Hetera confesses that her relentlessly burning passion strongly reminds him of an unforgettable soul from his past. Stepping forward with undeniable royal authority, he officially shatters his civilian disguise and formally introduces himself as Hetera Grady. Internally screaming that she already knew his true identity, she desperately wishes he had kept his incredibly dangerous royal status hidden. Closing the physical distance between them, Hetera reaches out to gently touch her striking silver hair with deep fascination. Trapped within his intense gaze, she stammers nervously as he openly admires her incredibly rare and beautiful ruby-red eyes. Eradicating the remaining space, the handsome prince tenderly cups her deeply flushed cheek with a startlingly gentle and intimate caress. Staring deeply into her trembling soul, Hetera passionately and confidently declares her natural beauty to be absolutely breathtaking. Shattering her absolute final illusion of safety, he smoothly drops her full name into the heavy romantic silence. Leaning incredibly close, the deeply grateful prince sincerely thanks Lady Dahlia Agnes once again for selflessly rescuing him from death. Completely overwhelmed by his devastating princely charm and sudden romantic assault, a deeply flustered Dahlia short-circuits on the spot. Smirking confidently at her sheer bewilderment, Hetera drops the final bombshell by revealing they actually met once as children. Leaving her utterly speechless, this stunning childhood revelation firmly locks her chaotic destiny directly to the Empire's most dangerous royal. Immersed in a bitter flashback, the vibrant sounds of a bustling social gathering violently echo around a young and profoundly isolated Dahlia. A sharp, authoritative voice suddenly shatters the background noise by aggressively calling out the lonely girl's name. Looming over the frightened child, her cruel stepmother sternly commands Dahlia to stay exactly in that spot and behave herself. Adding insult to injury, the wicked Nanazelia flashes a malicious smirk and mockingly bids her older sister farewell. Bowing her head in absolute defeat, the tragic young girl meekly agrees to her family's harsh isolation tactics. Left entirely alone in the massive hall, a heavy, suffocating silence violently crushes the small child's broken spirit. Staring miserably at the floor, she desperately and silently wishes to escape the humiliating gathering and simply go home. Her depressing thoughts are abruptly shattered when a young boy suddenly calls out to her from the encroaching shadows. Stepping confidently into the light, the boy formally introduces himself as Hetera Grady and confirms her identity as Lady Dahlia Agnes. Pure shock visibly jolts the young girl's delicate frame as she looks up at the incredibly handsome young prince. As Hetera politely requests a moment of her time, the reincarnated Dahlia internally marvels at why the illustrious first prince ever approached her. Despite the profound confusion, she vividly remembers how deeply her terribly lonely heart yearned for that fleeting moment of attention. Blushing furiously while stammering out an agreement, the young Villainess hopelessly allowed the charming royal to completely steal her shattered heart. Snapping violently back to the present reality, Dahlia gapes in sheer disbelief as the adult Hetera generously offers to personally assist her sword training. Struggling to process the incredibly tempting offer, she nervously questions if the missing prince should rightfully return to the capital. Dismissing her political concerns, Hetera smoothly explains he will remain hidden at the estate while his gravely wounded attendant secretly recovers. Flashing a dangerously charming smirk, The cunning royal confidently suggests this mutually beneficial arrangement works perfectly for her hidden ambitions. Thoroughly defeated by his flawless logic and overwhelming charisma, a deeply flushed Dahlia silently accepts his shocking proposal. A few grueling days pass as the unlikely duo fully commits to their intense, secret martial arts regimen. Standing firmly on the sunlit training grounds, the two determined figures square off for another brutal sparring session. The heavy, rhythmic clanging of solid wooden swords violently echoes through the quiet courtyard as they relentlessly cross blades. Panting heavily after suffering another crushing defeat, Dahlia graciously accepts Hetera's gentle praise regarding her rapidly improving combat skills. Humbly thanking the powerful prince for his incredible patience, she desperately suggests they take a brief moment to rest. Dropping her wooden weapon, the exhausted girl furiously wipes the heavy sweat from her deeply flushed face. Glancing over at her formidable opponent, she stares in absolute awe upon realizing the royal warrior is not even slightly winded. Marveling at his monstrous raw strength, her sharp mind frantically questions how someone this insanely powerful ever suffered such brutal, near-fatal injuries. Staring darkly into the distance, Hetera cryptically mutters that a person completely lacking the will to live is fundamentally no different from a rotting corpse. Thoroughly confused by his incredibly bleak statement, Dahlia tentatively asks the brooding prince to clarify his morbid philosophy. Instantly raising his emotional defenses, Hetera coldly shuts down her gentle inquiry by declaring it entirely unnecessary for her to know. Stung by his sudden, freezing rejection, a crestfallen Dahlia quietly accepts the harsh emotional boundary. A heavy, tense silence completely engulfs the training grounds as the enigmatic prince stares intently at the flustered girl. Shattering the quiet atmosphere, Hetera suddenly steps forward and reaches a large hand directly toward her startled face. Utterly caught off guard by his rapid movement, Dahlia gasps softly as his massive shadow completely envelopes her. Her heart violently hammers in her chest as the devastatingly handsome prince leans dangerously close to her trembling lips. Time seemingly freezes entirely as she braces herself for whatever the unpredictable royal intends to do. Plucking a stray piece of debris from her messy silver hair, Hetera softly explains that something was simply stuck to her head. Reeling from the immense emotional whiplash, a brightly blushing Dahlia stammers out a frantic stream of profound gratitude. Clutching her rapidly beating heart, she internally curses his effortless coolness while admitting she foolishly felt like the game's beloved heroine for a fleeting second. Pivoting smoothly back to business, Hetera confidently assures her that her newly acquired skills guarantee a solid victory at the Royal Knight's entrance exam. Panic violently explodes across Dahlia's face as she vehemently rejects the smirking prince's unnecessary offer to politically rig the prestigious test on her behalf. Fiercely rejecting his offer, she passionately declares that she will deeply resent him if he robs her of earning a true victory on her own merits. Absorbing her fiery determination, the prince simply acknowledges her unyielding stance with a calm murmur. Squirming uncomfortably under his intense gaze, she bitterly notes how his piercing expression frustratingly mirrors Miyabi's intimidating stare. The tense atmosphere instantly shatters as the prince sharply turns his head toward an approaching presence. A frantic newcomer suddenly bursts onto the scene, urgently calling out for the prince before abruptly halting at the sight of Lady Dahlia. Glaring in sheer annoyance, Hetera silently curses the sudden intrusion of his subordinate. Scoffing dismissively, Hetera mocks his attendant for tracking him down like a loyal hound while the aide furiously reprimands the prince for repeatedly vanishing into the night. Analyzing the newcomer's distinct purple eyes and navy blue hair, a horrifying spark of recognition suddenly strikes Dahlia's mind. Ignoring his aide's frantic warnings about recent assassination attempts, Hetera coldly commands the frustrated Ajiga to read the room. Pure panic violently erupts within her chest as she explicitly confirms the newcomer's terrifying identity. Vivid memories of the game's brutal lore flood her mind, reminding her that Ajiga permanently orchestrates Dahlia's devastating death route. Staring at the highly dangerous aide, she completely remembers that Ajiga serves as the exact executioner who personally slaughters her in the tragic downfall ending. Sensing her terrified scrutiny, the lethal aide slowly shifts his piercing gaze directly onto the trembling girl. Connecting the immediate facts, she frantically realizes that the gravely injured attendant Hetera previously mentioned operates as the deadly Ajiga standing right before her. Looming ominously over her small frame, the highly suspicious aide casts a violently cold and calculating shadow over her face. Leaning in aggressively, Ajiga fiercely interrogates her identity and viciously questions if she grasps the absolute authority of the prince standing beside her. Stumbling backward in sheer terror, she completely recoils from the deadly aid's incredibly sudden and suffocating intensity. The oppressive silence heavily blankets the courtyard as Ajiga relentlessly maintains his paralyzing glare. Softening his violent hostility just a fraction, the perceptive aide internally processes the incredibly bizarre situation unfolding around his master. Pausing his aggressive interrogation, a profound realization slowly washes over Ajiga's highly disciplined mind. Gazing thoughtfully at his royal master, Ajiga desperately searches his memory to pinpoint the final time the prince genuinely exhibited true happiness. Plunging deep into a nostalgic flashback from 10 years ago, he fondly recalls an era when the young first prince possessed an incredibly fragile innocence. Vividly remembering the energetic child, he pictures a tiny Hetera sprinting excitedly toward the garden knights while enduring gentle scoldings about royal restraint. The cheerful memory rapidly shifts as a towering, authoritative figure solemnly calls out the young prince's royal title. Stepping respectfully into the grand hall, Marquiscabiosa Agnes formally greets the young royalty with a deep, elegant bow. Proposing a strategic social bond, the Marquis warmly invites the prince to converse with his similarly aged daughter at an upcoming lavish tea party. Smiling brightly with untainted politeness, the cheerful young boy eagerly accepts the noble invitation to meet the mystery girl. Rolling the unfamiliar name over his small tongue, the innocent prince softly repeats the moniker Dahlia with genuine curiosity. Praising his precious daughter's unique beauty, the grieving Marquis proudly describes her striking silver hair and brilliant ruby eyes that perfectly mirror his late wife. Fascinated by the magical description, the young prince happily envisions a beautiful girl possessing shimmering silver hair and shining ruby eyes. The joyful childhood memories violently shatter as a crushing tragedy abruptly plunges the royal palace into an era of suffocating darkness. Sprinting desperately through the pouring rain, a younger Ajiga screams out for the grieving prince who stands completely paralyzed by absolute sorrow. Observing his shattered master emerge from the tragedy, Ajiga notes how the prince hardened into a brutally cold and ruthless entity perfectly suited for the imperial throne. Reflecting on that highly anticipated childhood tea party, the aide vividly recalls how visibly excited the prince felt right before the devastating social encounter. Fleeing hastily from the grand social event, a deeply disappointed Hetera completely ignores his loyal attendants' concerned inquiries. Clutching his chest in bitter despair, the young prince heavily mutters that his grand expectations regarding the girl failed completely. Summarizing the prince's subsequent tragic descent, Ajiga laments how that specific rejection permanently extinguished the boy's passion for life. Snapping aggressively back to the vibrant present, the sharply observant aide instantly shatters his dark reminiscing. Witnessing the intense and deeply joyful interaction between the adult prince and the fierce girl entirely stuns the loyal servant. Staring in absolute awe at the breathtaking scene, Ajiga finally realizes that Lady Dahlia miraculously resurrects the prince's long-lost, blazing vitality. Observing from the shadows, Ajiga quietly acknowledges that Lady Dahlia is undoubtedly having a profound effect on the deeply changed prince. Poring over a crucial document back in her room, a sudden shock completely derails her train of thought. Panic instantly seizes her as she realizes the highly anticipated night trials are exclusively being held far away in the bustling capital. Frantically calculating her limited options, she realizes she absolutely must secretly arrange a carriage to successfully transport her there. A sudden knocking at the door startles her before the polite head butler formally announces his unexpected arrival. Entering the quiet room, the elderly servant smoothly explains he is temporarily filling in for her unwell-assigned maid. Staring intently at the butler, she mentally debates whether she should risk everything by asking her supposed ally for crucial assistance. Shattering her anxious hesitation, the highly perceptive butler calmly states his knowledge of her massive, secret ambition to join the royal knights. Confirming her bold dream, she bravely challenges the old servant and firmly questions if he intends to brutally crush her plans. Shocking her completely, the loyal butler vehemently denies any intention of stopping her and instead humbly begs to assist her dangerous mission. Utterly stunned by his profound loyalty, she drops her jaw and stares blankly at the deeply bowing servant. Overjoyed by his incredible support, she gasps in pure delight as he expertly promises to secretly secure a carriage for her vital journey. Her immense excitement quickly fades into deep concern as she violently worries the wicked stepmother will brutally punish him for his treasonous aid. Gripping his heart with profound sorrow, the grieving butler intensely confesses he can no longer bear the heavy regret of failing to protect her. A heavy, highly emotional silence completely engulfs the quiet room as his deeply sincere and pained confession hangs heavily in the air. Forgiving him instantly, she gently reassures the weeping butler that the suffocating pressure from her cruel parents completely forced his helpless inaction. Bowing with unbreakable resolve, he firmly promises that a secret carriage will be waiting just outside the grand estate in exactly 3 days. Lingering solemnly by the heavy door, the deeply conflicted servant hesitates before quietly asking her a profoundly personal question. Peering sadly into her vibrant ruby eyes, he bravely asks if she holds deep, burning resentment toward her notoriously negligent father. Startled by the sudden mention of the absent Marquis, she drops her gaze as conflicting emotions violently swirl within her reincarnated heart. Quickly correcting her previous, bitter assumptions, the butler respectfully admits that while the Marquis dramatically changed, he never actually pressured the household staff. Delivering a massive emotional bombshell, he tearfully insists that her distant father always deeply loved her and never authorized her horrific abuse. Completely blindsided by this totally unexpected revelation, she weakly questions why he chose this exact, critical moment to share such heavy information. Acknowledging how incredibly convenient it sounds, the butler fiercely maintains that the grieving Marquis silently kept her close to his broken heart. Analyzing his deeply sorrowful expression, her sharp instincts immediately confirm the loyal servant is genuinely speaking the absolute truth. Struggling to accept this massive paradigm shift, she honestly admits her lingering doubts while sincerely thanking him for his incredible honesty. Left alone with her rapidly racing thoughts, she tragically realizes the original Dahlia would have wept with pure joy to hear this hidden truth. A profoundly sorrowful ache violently grips her soul as she remembers the doomed Villainess desperately starving for her family's affection right until her dying breath. 3 tense days later, she confidently slips out of her lavish room and sneaks cautiously through the heavily shadowed mansion corridors. Dressed sharply in her rugged boyish disguise, she strides purposefully toward the grand exit to officially launch her daring escape. Her stealthy operation violently crashes into a solid wall of dread when an incredibly sharp, venomous voice abruptly demands to know her exact business. Freezing dead in her tracks, pure terror violently courses through her veins as she slowly turns to face her absolutely furious stepmother. Glaring with sheer, unadulterated disgust, the wicked lady viciously mocks Dahlia's utterly embarrassing and deeply shameful peasant attire. Smirking with absolute malice, the cruel matriarch aggressively orders the disguised girl to her private quarters for immediate, brutal punishment. Instead of violently trembling in familiar, paralyzed terror, the newly reincarnated Kaori locks her fiery, completely unbroken gaze directly onto the abusive woman. Openly defying the incredibly stunned tyrant, she coldly and fearlessly declares that she has absolutely zero words left for her so-called mother. Viciously snapping the heavy chains of her past abuse, she forcefully rebukes the wicked woman for never truly treating her like a real daughter. Unleashing years of suppressed, burning rage, she boldly mocks the pathetic dynamic and entirely rejects the tyrant's suffocating, absolute authority. An explosive, deafening crack violently echoes through the grand hall as the absolutely enraged stepmother savagely slaps her across the face. Seething with uncontrollable, explosive fury, the vicious woman fiercely screams and violently demands complete submission from the girl she falsely claims to have raised. Glaring with pure defiance, Dahlia coldly informs her wicked stepmother that she never once asked the cruel woman to raise her. The tyrant violently recoils with a terrified shriek as the sheer intensity of the reincarnated girl's sudden rebellion completely shatters her absolute authority. Screaming for the guards to immediately lock the insolent brat in the dark dungeon, the panicked stepmother's tantrum is abruptly halted by a commanding voice questioning the chaotic commotion. The wicked woman instantly changes her aggressive tune, whining pathetically as the towering figure of the Marquis steps into the tense hallway. Dahlia intensely braces herself for the absolute worst as her imposing father steps forward to directly address the explosive family conflict. Feigning absolute heartbreak, the highly manipulative stepmother dramatically cries that Dahlia is brutally repaying all her supposed maternal love with treacherous betrayal. Piercing cleanly through the toxic theatrics, the stoic Marca locks his heavy gaze onto his daughter and sternly calls out her name. Delivering a massive shock, the patriarch calmly commands Dahlia to pack her belongings and temporarily leave the grand estate. Pure bewilderment forcefully rocks the disguised girl as she desperately processes her sudden banishment from her lifelong, abusive home. Instructing her to depart alongside the loyal head butler, the Marquis smoothly ensures her immediate transit away from the vicious stepmother's deadly grasp. The heavy wooden doors slam definitively behind them, leaving Dahlia silently following her enigmatic father down the dimly lit corridor. Frantically analyzing the highly bizarre situation, Dahlia wonders if her notoriously negligent father genuinely just saved her while she secretly plots a tactical escape. Sensing her overwhelming anxiety, the Marquis gently advises his highly guarded daughter to completely drop her defensive tension. Shattering her absolute secrecy, he calmly reveals that the trusted head butler already confessed her grand ambition to safely travel to the capital. Her mind violently spirals as she desperately tries to understand exactly why her supposedly loyal ally leaked her master plan directly to the head of the household. Challenging his absolute authority, she fiercely questions if he intends to lock her up, prompting the Marquis to ask if such captivity would actually break her knightly resolve. Locking eyes with the imposing patriarch, she fiercely vows with unbreakable conviction that absolutely nothing will stop her from reaching the royal capital. Acknowledging her blazing determination, the Marquis calmly relents and smoothly declares he has zero intention of obstructing her dangerous path. Utterly stunned by his profound lack of resistance, Dahlia stares blankly at the powerful man who silently allowed her horrific abuse for years. Boiling rage suddenly erupts from her chest as she viciously screams at him to stop acting like a caring father after violently ignoring her lifelong suffering. A heavy, agonizing silence completely falls between them as the grieving Marquis silently absorbs the full, devastating weight of his daughter's righteous fury. Bowing his head in deep sorrow, the broken man quietly and sincerely accepts the brutal truth of his massive parental failures. Validating her lifelong agony, he fully admits that she is absolutely correct to openly despise him for his cowardly negligence. Turning back toward the grand exit, the somber patriarch gently urges her forward to smoothly meet the secretly waiting carriage. Her burning anger slowly cools into profound confusion as she deeply struggles to reconcile this gentle man with the uncaring monster she originally envisioned. Deflating slightly, the emotionally exhausted girl quietly agrees and strictly follows her father out of the suffocating estate. The unlikely pair silently traverses the sprawling, manicured grounds under the quiet cover of the starry night sky. Approaching the discreetly prepared transport, she prepares to permanently sever her violent ties to the cruel Marquis household. Pausing right before boarding, she coldly throws one final piece of strategic advice at her father regarding his highly dangerous, unchecked wife. Deciding the Marquis is highly likely innocent of the treasonous plot against Hedera, she brilliantly leaves him with a crucial warning about the stepmother's impending treason as a parting gift. Staring deeply into her vibrant ruby eyes, the sorrowful father softly offers a tender, heartbreaking farewell to his only living bloodline. The heavy wooden wheels loudly clatter against the stone cobblestones as the grand carriage finally speeds away into the dark wilderness. Leaning back into the plush leather seats, she softly whispers a final goodbye to the deeply flawed man she leaves entirely behind. Exhausted by the brutal, bumpy journey, she groans loudly about the immense physical stress of spending endless hours trapped inside the swaying wooden box. A violent, bone-rattling jolt abruptly shatters her peaceful rest as the fast-moving carriage aggressively crashes to a sudden halt. Frantic screams from the terrified driver violently pierce the quiet air as Dahlia desperately braces herself against the heavy wooden walls. Pure chaos immediately erupts outside the carriage as panicked voices frantically scream about a heavily armed and incredibly deadly bandit ambush. Drawing her newly acquired sword, she bitterly marvels at the highly annoying fact that generic highway robbers actually exist within this fantasy game's massive lore. Kicking the carriage door violently open, she immediately locks eyes with a grimy, menacing bandit leader sporting a highly sinister smirk. The wicked ambusher aggressively points his rusted blade directly at Dahlia, loudly confirming that her incredibly rare silver hair and ruby eyes perfectly match his specific assassination target. Standing fiercely over the defeated bandits, a bloodthirsty Dahlia gleefully declares it has been far too long since she enjoyed a proper fight. Stepping menacingly toward the last conscious survivor, she tightly grips her gleaming sword to begin her ruthless interrogation. Pressing the razor-sharp blade dangerously close to his trembling throat, she fiercely demands to know exactly who orchestrated the deadly ambush. Sobbing uncontrollably in pure terror, the The pathetic mercenary frantically screams that they were merely hired to execute her and possess zero knowledge of their secretive employer. Withdrawing her heavy blade in deep frustration, she bitterly realizes the true identity of her wicked assassin remains completely shrouded in mystery. A familiar, deeply amused voice suddenly cuts through the bloody carnage, casually noting how thoroughly she decimated the armed highwayman. Stepping elegantly from the shadowy treeline, a smiling Hetera politely bids the stunned Lady Dahlia a good evening. Whirling around in absolute shock, she frantically demands to know what the first prince is doing so far from the royal capital. Closing the physical distance between them, Hetera smoothly confesses his deep fears regarding her safety while admitting his royal worry was clearly unnecessary. Staring in pure disbelief at the brutal massacre, Ajiga desperately questions if Dahlia truly slaughtered the bandits single-handedly instead of relying on the Agnes Knights. Utterly bewildered by the aide's confusing statement, she visibly hesitates and questions what mysterious knights he is referring to. Rustling loudly against the dense foliage, a highly trained squad of heavily armed guards suddenly materializes from the dark wilderness. Groaning in massive realization, Dahlia mentally connects the dots and realizes her father brilliantly dispatched an elite escort to track her every move. Drawing their gleaming weapons in perfect unison, the fiercely loyal Agnes Knights fiercely demand the two royal strangers identify themselves immediately. A heavily armored captain aggressively steps forward, violently ordering the suspicious men to back away from their precious Lady Dahlia. Stepping authoritatively in front of his amused master, a highly annoyed Ajiga coldly commands the foolish guards to lower their drawn blades. Shattering their aggressive bravado, the terrifying aide formally announces that the man they are threatening is the Balan Empire's first prince. Dropping instantly to their trembling knees, the absolutely horrified guards fiercely bow their heads and frantically scream their desperate apologies. Addressing the utterly defeated squad, a highly perceptive Hetera calmly clarifies the true nature of their secret mission. The trembling captain vehemently confirms the prince's astute deduction, stating the Marquis strictly ordered them to secretly protect Lady Dahlia at all costs. Her sharp mind violently races with absolute confusion as she furiously struggles to decipher her deeply enigmatic father's actual political loyalties. Relying on cold logic, she brilliantly deduces that her father cannot possibly be conspiring with her murderous stepmother if he explicitly deployed elite guards to counter the assassination attempt. Sensing her intense emotional turmoil, Hetera gently reassures the conflicted girl that the powerful Marquis clearly supports her defiant actions. Staring up into his striking golden eyes, a deeply vulnerable Dahlia softly questions if he truly believes her father actually cares. A heavy, incredibly intimate silence completely blankets the dark forest as the handsome prince gazes intensely at her delicate face. His warm expression violently hardens into absolute fury as his sharp eyes lock onto a glaring red mark violently staining her pale cheek. Reaching out with surprising tenderness, the protective prince softly touches the brutal bruise and somberly notes her painful injury. Frantically waving her hands to deny his deadly assumption, she rapidly clarifies that the defeated bandits absolutely did not cause the harsh slap mark. A dangerously dark and highly murderous aura immediately erupts from Hetera as he coldly demands to know exactly who dared to strike her. Sweating nervously under his paralyzing protective glare, the heavily flustered Dahlia desperately stammers while searching for a believable lie. Forcefully brushing past his terrifying interrogation, she loudly declares her absolute physical wellness and stubbornly announces her immediate march toward the capital. Moving with blinding speed, the towering prince violently blocks her escape path while firmly grasping the heavy leather reins of his massive warhorse. Flashing a devastatingly handsome smirk, he smoothly invites the heavily flustered girl to abandon her dangerous solo trek and ride alongside him. Expertly crushing her nervous internal protests, Hetera logically explains that allowing a targeted noblewoman to travel completely alone is an absolutely unacceptable risk. Yielding reluctantly to his flawless logic, she cautiously agrees but stubbornly insists on riding securely in the back to maintain physical distance. Completely ignoring her modest request, the incredibly strong prince effortlessly hoists her onto the front saddle while boldly claiming the rear position is far too dangerous. Wrapping his highly muscular arms securely around her tiny waist, Hetera leans dangerously close to her burning ear and smoothly commands her to hold on tight. Trapped helplessly within his overpowering romantic embrace, a deeply blushing Dahlia internally screams in pure panic upon realizing she violently triggered a massive romantic game event. Spurring the incredibly powerful beast into explosive motion, the determined prince initiates a fiercely rapid gallop toward the distant, glowing capital. Clinging desperately to the leather reins, she completely surrenders to the wild, rushing wind as the majestic horse violently leaps forward into their chaotic destiny. Riding upon the powerful warhorse, Hetera smoothly asks if the rushing wind feels amazing as they journey together. Hetera gently compliments a deeply flushed Dahlia for handling the intense horseback ride surprisingly well for her first time. Clinging tightly to his frame, Dahlia bashfully admits the fast-paced ride is slightly tricky but completely manageable. She marvels internally that Hetera's incredibly broad back makes her feel entirely safe and completely fearless. A sudden wave of nostalgia washes over her as the rushing sensation triggers a deeply hidden memory. She fondly recalls experiencing a wildly similar thrill while riding on the back of Miyabi's roaring motorcycle in her chaotic past life. Wondering about her abandoned motorcycle, a sudden and grim realization violently interrupts her peaceful thoughts. A heavy sadness violently grips her chest as she finally confronts the deeply suppressed truth that she truly died in her previous world. A soft, profoundly fond chuckle unexpectedly escapes her lips despite the incredibly morbid realization of her own demise. Shattering the quiet atmosphere, Hetera softly whispers that he is genuinely glad they finally get to ride together again. Pure confusion violently spikes within her racing mind as she frantically questions his highly suspicious use of the word again. Before she can fiercely interrogate his strange statement, he urgently warns her to be careful as the massive horse shifts its weight. Trapped within the intimate moment, Dahlia falls completely silent and presses herself securely against the powerful prince. She decisively pushes the burning mystery aside to simply focus on the incredible warmth of Hetera's back until they safely reach the capital. Arriving at their vibrant destination, Dahlia stares in absolute awe at the massive, bustling architecture of the glorious imperial capital. Immersing herself in the lively crowd, she fiercely banters with Hetera while intensely admiring the endless rows of delicious food stalls. Her excited gaze suddenly locks onto a brightly colored display, instantly freezing her completely in her tracks. Her brilliant ruby eyes widen in pure, unadulterated delight as she spots an incredibly adorable, sugary treat resting on the counter. A wave of past-life insecurity momentarily crushes her excitement as she bitterly assumes something so cute simply does not suit her tough image. Breaking her mental blockade, she softly wonders what the deeply tragic original Dahlia would have wanted to enjoy in this vibrant moment. A sudden, empowering epiphany shatters her hesitation as she boldly remembers she completely owns Dahlia's beautiful physical form now. Fully embracing her secret passion, she confidently points at the delicious sweet and happily orders it from the cheerful vendor. Taking a massive bite of the sugary snack, a bright blush of pure culinary bliss violently erupts across her delicate cheeks. The handsome prince silently watches her incredibly joyful reaction with a deeply unreadable and fiercely intense expression. Noticing his heavy, unwavering stare, a highly flustered Dahlia nervously asks the silent prince if something is wrong. Moving with startling, predatory speed, Hetera aggressively pulls her directly toward his towering physical frame. Pure panic violently surges through Dahlia as she finds herself trapped entirely within his suffocatingly close, romantic embrace. Hetera leans dangerously close, smoothly wiping a stray crumb directly from the corner of her heavily trembling lips. Blushing furiously, she internally screams in sheer panic that the dangerously handsome prince is being wildly over-affectionate. Popping the stolen crumb into his own mouth, he smirks while Dahlia desperately attempts to rationalize his intense behavior by comparing him to Miyabi. The charming prince completely locks his golden eyes with hers and smoothly declares that the treat is incredibly sweet. Melting entirely under his fiercely intense eye contact, she awkwardly stammers out a clumsy, breathless agreement. Pulling slightly away, a sharp wave of tactical suspicion violently replaces her romantic embarrassment as she concludes something is definitely off about him. Analyzing the original game's rigid lore, she logically deduces the primary romance target has absolutely zero reason to act this sweetly toward a doomed villainess. When the highly observant Hetera asks if something is wrong, she frantically flashes a fake smile and completely denies her mounting suspicions. Staring at his perfectly modeled face, her reincarnated mind frantically questions why this seemingly perfect prince feels fundamentally different from his digital counterpart. The tense, romantic atmosphere swiftly fades as they officially arrive at the colossal, heavily guarded structure hosting the night trials. A loud, booming voice violently echoes across the massive testing grounds as the strict examiner forcefully calls for the next hopeful candidate. Gripping her newly acquired sword tightly, a deeply determined Dahlia boldly steps forward to face her brutal martial destiny. The condescending examiner instantly attempts to dismiss her toward the spectator seating before she fiercely interrupts him with a cold denial. Standing boldly before the registration desk, a fiercely determined Dahlia announces her arrival to conquer the grueling night entrance exam. The utterly bewildered clerk points her toward the testing grounds while staring in pure disbelief at the petite girl. Mocking whispers instantly erupt through the crowded hall as arrogant male candidates violently scoff at her slender frame. Striding confidently past the gossiping crowd, she internally scoffs at their narrow-minded shock over a female knight candidate. The surrounding chatter abruptly shifts as the intimidated crowd murmurs about a highly hyped prodigy practically guaranteed to dominate the trials. Locking eyes onto a striking youth, Dahlia instantly recognizes the crushing and undeniable aura of a true warrior. Observing his sharp and deeply serious demeanor, she completely respects the intense hardships he clearly endured to reach this stage. A massive jolt of recognition violently rocks her mind as she abruptly matches the intense boy's face to the legendary Shiran. Sensing her intense gaze, the aloof prodigy shoots her a freezing glare and coldly demands to know what she wants. Flustered by his intimidatingly sharp response, she rapidly apologizes while her reincarnated mind violently pieces his true identity together. She vividly recalls that Shiran serves as a major romance target and the fiercely driven second son of the powerful Duke Mardel. Despite the original Villainess entirely missing his storyline, she deeply admired his relentless climb to become the ultimate knight commander. Stepping forward with burning resolve, she boldly introduces herself and internally vows to forge a fierce rivalry with the future legend. Completely rejecting her fiery introduction, the deeply guarded Shiran ruthlessly advises her to maintain a massive distance from him. Watching his retreating back, she grins knowingly as she remembers his notoriously cold and unapproachable digital persona. The oppressive silence heavily blankets the testing grounds as the surrounding candidates fiercely prepare for the brutal physical trials ahead. Glaring sharply at the lingering judgment from the male hopefuls, she loudly questions their pathetic disbelief at a female warrior. Unleashing her fierce logic, she aggressively reminds the stunned crowd that the royal regulations permit any capable woman to compete. Shattering her noble chains, she coldly declares her absolute readiness to completely discard the prestigious Agnes name to forge her own destiny. Radiating raw excitement, she passionately champions raw martial skill while praising the thriving female knights roaring across neighboring empires. Gripping her weapon tightly, a highly wicked smirk violently spreads across her face as she plots to utterly annihilate their fragile egos. Channeling her explosive energy, she powerfully drops into a flawless combat stance to begin her brutal march toward ultimate victory. Unleashing a fierce battle cry, she charges directly into the chaotic fray with an unbreakable vow to pass the grueling entrance exam. A pristine certificate of admission gleams triumphantly in the sunlight to officially validate her massive and hard-fought martial victory. Holding the precious document, she gratefully attributes her flawless success to the brutally intense secret training sessions with Prince Hedera. Despite her glorious triumph, she humbly acknowledges that Shiran's terrifyingly raw combat skills currently operate on an entirely unreachable level. Fiercely refusing to plateau, she vows to push her limits even further right before a familiar voice smoothly interrupts her intense strategizing. Whirling around in absolute shock, she loudly gasps as the incredibly aloof Lord Shiran suddenly approaches her victorious form. Piercing right through his cold exterior, the observant prodigy questions her living situation after learning she abandoned her powerful noble estate. Politely brushing off the uncomfortable conditions, she flashes a bright smile of genuine gratitude for his surprisingly warm concern. A highly intense silence completely grips the courtyard as Shiran intensely studies her cheerful and completely unbroken spirit. Shattering the heavy quiet, the notoriously guarded knight abruptly shocks her by offering a highly unexpected invitation to join him. Smoothly laying out his logic, he generously invites her to temporarily reside at the massive Mardel estate until the upcoming induction ceremony. Completely floored by the immense hospitality, she nervously questions if sheltering a runaway noblewoman would violently disrupt his powerful family. Dismissing her massive anxiety, Shiran flashes a deeply cryptic smirk and calmly promises that she will actually be the one completely surprised. Tilting her head in pure bewilderment, She desperately tries to decipher the hidden meaning behind his incredibly mysterious warning. Pushed by an undeniable curiosity, she confidently accepts his massive offer and bows deeply to finalize their temporary elite living arrangement. Radiating pure battle lust, she aggressively leans in and eagerly declares her burning desire to cross blades with the prodigy during her stay. Turning slightly away, the striking knight quietly speaks his own name into the heavy air to officially acknowledge their blooming camaraderie. Caught completely off guard by his sudden vulnerability, a deeply intrigued Dahlia locks onto his intense gaze as her dangerous new life officially begins. The stoic knight firmly commands Dahlia to drop the formal titles and simply call him by his first name, Shiran. Blinking in mild surprise, the young warrior quickly absorbs his highly unexpected invitation to discard their rigid social boundaries. Flashing a bright smile, she happily agrees to the new dynamic and smoothly insists that he casually use her first name in return. Turning his face slightly away to hide his softening expression, the aloof prodigy cryptically promises to use her name if the right opportunity eventually arises. Complaining bitterly about the suffocating crowd, Shiran abruptly turns on his heel and authoritatively orders her to follow him out of the chaotic testing arena. Watching his broad, retreating back, she warmly marvels at his blunt nature and accurately deduces that his socially awkward charm effortlessly steals girls' hearts. A luxurious, heavy carriage swiftly transports the unlikely duo away from the busy capital streets toward a highly exclusive and secure location. Stepping onto the breathtaking grounds, Dahlia gapes in pure awe and bitterly notes that the colossal Mardell estate makes her own noble household look like a pathetic, rundown shack. Leaving her safely positioned in the grand foyer, Shiran calmly delegates her care to the elite household staff while she loudly expresses her profound, unending gratitude. A sharply dressed, highly professional maid immediately approaches the awestruck guest and respectfully calls out her noble name to quickly grab her attention. Bowing with absolute, flawless etiquette, the elegant servant introduces herself as one of Lady Rose Mardell's personal maids and formally delivers a sudden, highly intimidating meeting request. A massive wave of horrifying realization violently crashes over Dahlia as she completely recognizes the requested name. Pure panic violently grips her soul as the terrifying lore surrounding Shiran's sibling floods her mind. She vividly recalls that Rose is the dangerously unhinged villainess of Shiran's route who goes completely off the rails due to her massive brother complex. Sweating nervously, Dahlia bitterly laments her terrible luck for accidentally wandering directly into the psychotic sister's narrative path. Bracing herself for inevitable chaos, she absolutely dreads finally coming face to face with the notoriously toxic noblewoman. Entering the incredibly lavish chambers, Dahlia silently marvels at the aggressively opulent decor that perfectly fits a high-tier villainess. A sharp, deeply arrogant clearing of the throat abruptly draws her attention toward a highly intimidating figure. Lounging dramatically on an ornate sofa, the wicked Rose Mardell coldly questions her unexpected guest's identity. Maintaining flawless aristocratic poise, Dahlia gracefully curtsies and formally introduces herself to the dangerous host. Glaring with pure, unfiltered judgment, Rose heavily scrutinizes every single inch of the silver-haired girl's appearance. Dripping with absolute condescension, the arrogant lady dismissively declares Dahlia's strikingly beautiful features to be merely passable. Boiling with sudden rage, Dahlia internally screams in sheer outrage that her flawlessly gorgeous reincarnated face just got completely insulted. Completely ignoring Dahlia's hidden fury, Rose aggressively pivots the tense conversation to interrogate her grand martial ambitions. Leaning forward with a wicked sneer, the cruel noblewoman viciously brands her knighthood dreams as absolutely shameful for a proper lady. Raising her delicate hand, the malicious sister deliberately prepares to establish absolute dominance over the wandering commoner. With a highly calculated flick of her wrist, Rose violently tosses a small object directly onto the hard floor. Glaring down from her luxurious perch, she coldly commands Dahlia to pick it up and instantly prove her total subservience. A violently dark aura erupts within Dahlia's mind as she furiously realizes this arrogant tyrant genuinely expects her to blindly submit. Refusing to cower, Dahlia channels her past life gang leader energy and flashes an incredibly dangerous, icy smirk. Moving with terrifying confidence, the fearless reincarnator casually plucks a decorative item and deliberately drops it beside Rose's fallen object. The heavy object clatters violently against the polished floor, completely shattering the oppressive and heavily controlled atmosphere. Faking a flawless aristocratic apology, Dahlia coldly suggests that the lazy noblewoman should simply pick up her own garbage. Pure, unadulterated shock violently paralyzes the arrogant Rose as her massive ego shatters against Dahlia's flawless defiance. Exploding into a highly unhinged tantrum, the furious Duke's daughter wildly screams for the insolent peasant to immediately get out. Ruthlessly overpowering her screams, Dahlia fiercely defends female knights and brilliantly weaponizes the Empire's strict meritocracy to corner the screaming Villainess. Glaring with pure disgust, Dahlia brutally tears down the pathetic, heavily restrictive reality of a noblewoman's suffocating existence. Scoffing at the hysterical threat of permanently losing all marriage prospects, Dahlia confidently declares she possesses absolutely zero fear regarding such trivial matters. Standing incredibly tall against the enraged tyrant, Dahlia passionately vows to successfully carve out a totally unrestrained and wildly free life. Utterly defeated by the unbreakable resolve, the highly toxic sister violently clicks her tongue in pure, deeply bitter frustration. Shattering the tense standoff, a highly amused Rose abruptly scoffs at the sheer absurdity of the situation. Dahlia watches in absolute bewilderment as the notoriously dangerous Villainess completely drops her terrifying aura. A frantic voice violently echoes down the grand hallway as someone desperately screams Dahlia's name. Bursting through the heavy wooden doors, a deeply panicked Shyran aggressively charges into the opulent room. Panting heavily from his desperate sprint, the highly trained prodigy fiercely assesses the immediate threat level. Completely ignoring his furious scolding, the deeply unhinged Rose instantly melts into a doting sister obsessed with her adorable little brother. Staring in pure disbelief, Dahlia violently realizes the terrifying game lore regarding the sister's massive brother complex is completely real. Stepping aggressively between the two women, a highly protective Shyran fiercely demands to know if his wicked sister harmed his precious guest. Flashing a perfectly innocent expression, the cunning noblewoman smoothly denies committing any violent acts against the silver-haired girl. Desperately pleading for peace, the exhausted knight practically begs his chaotic sibling to maintain proper aristocratic decorum. Smirking with undeniable approval, Rose boldly confesses her genuine, hard-earned respect for the commoner's blazing defiance. Pure confusion violently short-circuits Dahlia's racing mind as she frantically struggles to process the tyrant's completely unexpected praise. Retreating to a quiet corridor, the deeply embarrassed Shyran awkwardly attempts to salvage his family's highly damaged reputation. Apologizing profusely for his sister's unhinged behavior, the formidable knight receives a warmly forgiving smile from his resilient guest. Interrupting his frantic excuses, Dahlia intensely locks her brilliant ruby eyes onto a highly specific detail from his dramatic entrance. Grinning with absolute triumph, she eagerly points out that the famously guarded prodigy finally screamed her actual name. A massive jolt of pure shock violently rocks the stoic knight as he completely realizes his massive emotional slip-up. Sweating nervously, the flustered boy cautiously asks if crossing that intimate boundary offended her while she vigorously shakes her head. Radiating pure joy, Dahlia sincerely confesses that hearing him use her first name made her feel incredibly close to him. Caught completely off guard by her blinding emotional honesty, the tough warrior literally chokes on his own breath. Violently flushing a deep crimson, the completely overwhelmed Shyran aggressively turns his face away and screams at her to stop being so embarrassing. A bright, highly victorious laugh easily escapes Dahlia's lips as she thoroughly enjoys breaking the Ice Prince's flawless composure. Desperately clutching his burning face, the highly flustered prodigy heavily avoids making any direct eye contact with the radiant girl. A thunderous, violently heavy heartbeat echoes loudly in his chest as an undeniable new affection firmly takes root in his soul. Completely surrendering to the incredibly warm moment, a soft and genuinely happy chuckle finally escapes the young knight's lips.